What's up, guys? Welcome back. In this video today, I want to talk a little bit about getting your amp prepped for a gig. Basically, kind of just maintaining the amp, troubleshooting any problems you might have, and going through it, getting it ready. I got a few things I'm going to work on with this amp. I got power tubes that I think are hurting. I have some noisy reverb cables, and I have a speaker that's officially shit the bed. So I'm going to get those things swapped, and I'll take you guys through it with me so you can see what goes on and see how I like to set them up so they're running clean. One thing about my gear is I like to, it may not be the best, but I try to like to maintain it and keep it healthy, because I think that it runs best, Also, just a disclaimer now, if you're going to dig inside an amp and you're inexperienced, I would take it to a recommended professional. Changing power tubes is not really something that can kill you, but anything where you're touching high voltages and transformers and you can pass current, it can knock you on your ass. So that's just my disclaimer. If you're feeling unsure, take it to somebody who knows what they're doing. So like I said, this is what we're working with. I got a few sets of power tubes I want to try. That's the new speaker. It's a JBL E130. It's an 8-ohm speaker. It's got that sound that I like, and I'm going to try to swap that in. And a new set of reverb cables. And this is a Weber bias right. This is what I use. It's an invaluable tool when you're swapping tubes, or if you're a tube junkie and you just want to make a quick change and adjust bias. I don't know if they make these anymore, but I have this one and I've repaired it a few times, but I love it. I can't do anything without it. So yeah, that's what we're going to be working on. One thing especially with the older Fender amps and even the newer ones, make sure you have a good screwdriver for these, because you can strip these out and they can round out pretty easy and they're a real pain to get out. But it's a long stud that goes through the chassis and pulls up on the chassis and sandwiches the chassis to the top of the cabinet. But I'm going to get it all dissected, and then we'll get into the mods. One thing I do like to do with especially the older Fender amps is if it's a 2-prong cord, I like to add a grounded 3-prong cord, just because getting electrocuted during a gig isn't fun, and it keeps everything safe. Deletes the ground switch, and like I said, it just keeps everything safe, and you're grounded. Alright, so we have all of our retaining nuts for the speaker out. When I'm doing a speaker swap, I like to take everything out of the amp, only because you can the studs that the speaker sits on, sometimes you can damage what you have. You can poke through the cone. So I just like to I like to have everything out of my way so there's no extra variables. And with the speakers, I like to just lift straight up and try to bring them up as evenly as possible. And with the new one especially, I like to line up all my holes to the speaker going in and seat it as evenly as straight as possible so I can avoid any kind of damage. Like I said, I'm just getting all of the retaining nuts accounted for, so I'm not missing one, getting them all started. And then a little note from Cesar Diaz right there. And then what I like to do is try to tighten them, go 2 or 3 turns at a time in an X pattern, because you don't want to tighten one side all the way up and then try to tighten the other side. So I'll just crisscross everything so I know I'm pulling the speaker down square and evenly. One thing with the JBLs too is their wiring is backwards. So their red is actually the negative lead, and I'll show you a way you can determine. Some cabs and some manufacturers, and depending on some wiring schematics, they'll want you to wire the speakers out of phase. But it's only a single speaker, obviously. So if you get yourself a 9-volt battery, you can use it as a pulse for the speaker to look at the cone and see which way the throw is. And we want the speaker to go out towards the audience, not pull in. So that's your tip is your positive, and this is your ground side. So I'll find that on the battery, and there we go. Try to bring it in so you can see it. So now we got the speaker installed. We'll move on to the reverb cables, and we'll get the chassis ready. So like I said, I was having some problems with the reverb being a little noisy. One thing about Fender, it has, to me, the best reverb ever, but it's also the most problematic, and you get a lot of noise from it. So when I was having those problems, I would move the reverb cables around and the reverb would come back. So I just got a set of aftermarket cables, and I'm just going to swap them in because it's one less variable I have to worry about, and if it still gives me problems, I'll have to dig further in, but I think the cable should take care of it. Now this amp normally didn't come with reverb, but it's a modified Fender Pro by Cesar Diaz, and he was nice enough to add reverb when he modified it in 1990. So I bought reverb cables for an actual Pro reverb because the chassis dimensions are the same and the cabinet dimensions are the same. So hopefully when we get all done, these are long enough. So we got that all taken care of. Another trick too is when you're using a stronger high-powered speaker, I try to mount the reverb tank as far away from being directly under the speaker, you know, like, so I'll get it as close to the back baffle as I can, because you can get some weird vibrations from it. Put the little eyelet back on. It's always good to hold that stuff out of the way. This may be crazy, but I feel like when the work is done cleanly and properly, that you get a better result in the end. You know, some people may say, well, it's an amp, it's going to work regardless. That's true. It might just work regardless, but to me, just putting the stuff back where it was, where it belongs, how it was, I think it just aids in having a good outcome. We'll attack the chassis now. We'll get that back installed. Now, I have explained the preamp tube function in a previous video, what you can do, what to look for, how to test them. So I'm not going to get into that right now. We're just going to focus on the power tubes because I'm pretty happy with the preamp tube selection that I have going on right now. As far as the chassis, you just want to let it find its way, just always supporting the weight lifting up on it, and it'll find its way home, and usually sit even with the front of the grill. And then you just put your studs through and you start tightening it up. Now the fun part, these new old stock GE 6L6, I've beat the shit out of them, and I couldn't ask for any more out of them. But I'll show you what they look like. Maybe when one's a little weak, I'll set it up on the bias right, and you can see what they do to get an idea if you have a bad tube or not. Bias right is also pretty self-explanatory. Tube A, tube B, so we got action. They're warming up. I'll let them warm up for a little bit. Come back and we'll just see what they're reading on the bias right. We've been heating up for a little bit, and you can see on the bias right
tube B is we'll call it 42. Tube A is 32. I usually set them up around 33, so that means that tube B has lost something along the way. It's heating up pretty good. So we're going to swap in some tubes and see what we can get to work.
I just found this. If everybody know, you guys probably know by now, I'm a tube junkie. I love to collect tubes, and I just found this really, really nice set of Sylvania 6L6 GC. Very similar to the GE, but these have a nice tight low end to them, and we're going to swap these in and see what we can get. Hopefully these work, because it's a really clean set, and I'd like if I can get them to balance out really nice. That'd be great. What you're looking for is to just make sure that everything is glowing evenly, lighting up. You don't want one tube cold. They should start feeling warm to the touch. And if you get a little sound, that's even better. So we're going to let these cook in here a little bit with the amp running. Speaker always hooked up. Remember that. When testing tubes, you want to have the speaker load always on the amplifier. We'll let these cook for about 15-20 minutes, and we'll come back. Alright, so we got some time letting the Sylvanias cook up. We'll check the bias rate, see what we got for a reading. Okay, so right now, 2B is 21.2. But what can happen sometimes is when you bring these into bias spec, they can level out. So what I'll do is, on most Fender amps, there's a bias pot inside. I don't recommend you to do this for fun. Watch as I slowly adjust bias, you can see it change. 6L6 like this, I like to pin it about 33.5. Let's see what that did to B. Still shy. We'll try another set of tubes. One thing I will say is sometimes when swapping tubes, you can swap the positions of them because they may read differently in, say, tube B may read differently in tube A than it does in tube B. So I have just gone ahead and done that, and that is a pretty well matched set of tubes. You're talking 29.5, 31.2. That's within 3% of what you want. You want them to both be in 3% of each other. So that's a good set. I can actually, this is the lower one, so I'll go on the high side because I don't want to damage the tube, and I can bring this bias up just a little more. Check our tube A. Very happy with that. So Weber Bias Rate recommends pulling the bias meter out before playing the amp to make sure it sounds good. So I'll do that now, and we'll just check out the tone. Alright, so we're back up on all fours running, and it sounds great. It did exactly what I wanted to. It took that harsh top end down just a little bit, and it's... there's some tips on how you can maintain your amps to keep them gig ready, to keep them roadworthy. You're not really having to worry about them if they're solid and you do them right the first time. Obviously, my practices aren't the perfect or the best. It's just what I've learned over time. You may pick up hints along the way, and be sure to share them with people because they can be super helpful. I hope this video helps you guys. Remember that trick with the tubes. You may have a tube that's reading high on one side, but if you just swap them, you may get a better result like I did. And I was really glad I could use those Sylvanias because it's such a great tube. So yeah, man, check back for more updates. You saw me playing the Ash Strat earlier. It's a great guitar. It's amazing. I'm still wrapping my head around it, but there'll be a video about it soon. Peace, guys. Have a good weekend.